One of our goals is to help the Waymo driver see as many different diverse conditions as possible to improve the underlying product. We want to ensure as close as possible every single ride to be as clean to meet the customer expectations when they open their app. And that's why we think that fleet operations are such a critical part of scaling autonomy
Yeah.
commercially.
Mm.
Because unless you get this part of that pie correct, then the overall system isn't necessarily sustainable. And so today we're already in advanced planning for 2027, 2028, as we think about the rollout and deployment of this infrastructure.
Ming Maa is the co-founder and CEO of Moove AV, a global fleet provider for autonomous vehicles. Prior to co-founding Moove AV, he was group president of Grab, the leading super app providing ride-hailing, food, and grocery delivery and digital banking services across 8 countries and 500 plus cities in Southeast Asia. Ming has over 27 years of finance and investment experience across the United States and Asia, and previously was at SoftBank Group Corp, where he helped oversee investments in leading ride-sharing and e-commerce companies. Ming, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Harry.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. And, I obviously know you from your work at Move. And when I was researching, I saw Grab. And then you sent me your bio and I saw the SoftBank work you did in the ride sharing space. So I might have met my match when it comes to someone who's been in the rideshare industry, as long, if not longer than myself.
No, I doubt that. It's the ride sharing industry has been such an amazing and just a dynamic industry. And we're at this amazing period in time right now where I think there's just a tremendous amount of innovation that will set up the ride sharing industry for the next 10, 20 years. So we're really excited to be part of that autonomous revolution that's happening every day on the ground that we see it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I think we're definitely going to talk all about Move AV and the business
Mm.
model that you guys are, really leading, with top partners in the AV space. But before we get into that, I'd love to start with your background because, like I said, you've been in this space for a while. What sort of inspired you to join Move AV? What was it that you did at Grab or that you obviously liked about the ride sharing industry that made you want more?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. As you mentioned, Grab is the largest ride-sharing and food delivery company across Southeast Asia. Serving over 500 different cities across 8 different countries. And when I first became president of Grab, one of my very first projects was in setting up the captive fleet operations business in Singapore.
Hmm.
And that business ultimately scaled to tens of thousands of vehicles across multiple different countries in Southeast
Hmm.
Asia. But what was very interesting to me is one of the conundrums that we always faced in ride sharing is that it certainly created just a tremendous amount of value for consumers around the world.
Yeah.
But if you look at it critically at the same time, the fundamental CVP or the customer value proposition hasn't evolved at the
Hmm.
same pace that you would expect from your for technology. I would argue the experience of opening up a ride sharing app and ordering a car is largely the same experience that it was
Yeah.
5 years ago. There's
Maybe
obviously
10
more
years ago.
categories of cars, even 10 years ago. That's right. There's different categories of vehicles, but by and large, it's largely stayed the exact same experience. Now, the only thing that has changed is around pricing. And
Yeah.
arguably, it's one of the few sectors in technology where it is price inflationary. And that's obviously because of rising labor costs.
Yeah.
Now, compare that with most sectors within technology, which becomes lower cost over time. And so it was that conundrum that we were always facing.
Hmm.
So we spent a lot of time at Grab looking at autonomy as a way to fundamentally change that CVP.
Hmm.
And Singapore, of course, is a great market for autonomy. Everyone follows the rules. Trip pricing is sufficiently
Yeah.
robust to cover the cost of the vehicle. It's very orderly. And so that really felt like the right poster child, for
Hmm.
autonomy. But it became very clear to me that the key question that we all need to figure out is ultimately who is going to own the vehicles.
Hmm.
Um, because ultimately, many AV companies want to monetize their R&D by selling vehicles to third parties. And then ultimately, ride-sharing platforms want to stay as asset light as possible in their business models. And so that question, who is ultimately going to own the vehicles,
Hmm.
was the inspiration for me to start thinking about launching the world's first independent fleet operator for autonomy.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward, a few years, we now operate the Waymo fleet in Phoenix, Arizona,
Hmm.
which is Waymo's first commercial market. We launched the Waymo fleet in Miami in January, and we believe Miami will be the largest East Coast market. And now we've announced our plans to operate Waymo in London, which will be the largest market across Europe.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's very cool. And, I think one thing that I guess you're the guy to talk to, but I mean, this fleet, you called it a captive fleet ops, which I think is a very technical term. Sounds better than what I've called it. I say there are a lot of fleet owners in outside of the United States. This model is quite prevalent, right? In emerging markets. I mean, I would say maybe in China, everywhere, right? Aren't, Uber, Grab, all of these companies. It's less hairy going out on a Saturday night driving for Uber in Los Angeles and more renting or leasing vehicles, right? That model is much more prevalent outside the US.
Absolutely. And I think it really stems from fundamentally in markets where there is a supply shortage of vehicles.
Hmm.
And that supply shortage may come from different factors. It may come from affordability of the underlying vehicle.
Yeah.
It may come from a challenge in getting vehicle financing for drivers. In
Mm.
those situations, and Singapore is an example of a market that is chronically supply constrained.
Mm.
One of the superpowers of a ride-sharing company or platform is to create that supply by creating the fleets within these supply
Hmm.
constrained markets in order to boost up the supply of vehicles.
Yeah. And I mean, sometimes it's regulatory, right? In China and other places, there's a physical limit on the number of vehicles, right? Some places.
That's right. That's right. And so
Yeah.
it really is now with the regulatory aspect is another version of a supply shortage, in my
Yeah.
mind. And so it can come from
Got it.
affordability, it can come from regulatory, distinctions, but fundamentally there's a supply gap in
Yeah.
the market, and that's what creates the opportunity for fleets.
Well, and I guess it just makes me think that there's probably a lot of international talent out there. I mean, like yourself, that has a lot of experience, running fleets. And, there is this model does exist in the United States, right? In New York City, most drivers
Mm.
work through a fleet owner. There are fleet owners, but it might be 10 to 20% of Uber and Lyft drivers in Los Angeles that do this. Whereas I think internationally, those numbers might be flipped. So just sort of makes me think that there might be some good talent out there abroad as now as we're going to get into this AV landscape shifts to more of a fleet owner model that might be valuable in the future.
100%. We believe that the approach to autonomy is through fleets
Hmm.
first.
Got it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Moove AV. This is the outfit that you co-founded and you are now running. What is the difference between Moove AV and I think the other one, I guess, would be Moove.io? Are these two separate brands or related?
Very, very related. The
Same name.
Move.io, that's right. Move.io really started as a solution to the vehicle financing problem in developing markets. In many of these markets, it can be very, very challenging to
Hmm.
underwrite the credit quality of drivers in markets. And so one of Move.io's superpowers was in understanding how to structure and pull together the vehicle financing that's needed in order to create fleets and then enable drivers to perform work on ride-sharing platforms.
Yeah.
Now, it was quite clear, of course, that when you look forward to the future of ride-sharing, the future is within autonomy. And interestingly, one of the key challenges in autonomy is a similar challenge is how do you finance the vehicles in a very complicated situation?
Yeah.
And so that core competency, I think, has served well in creating the AV business here
Hmm.
in the US and ultimately as we expand beyond the US.
You mentioned that the cities that you're operating with Waymo, and I think one thing that stood out to me is that you're in Waymo's original market, Phoenix, but you're also in one of their newest and flashiest, and I'll call sexiest markets in London, which kind of tells me that Waymo has other partners where they do one or two cities and then they stop, or they're not doing cities with certain partners. So one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on, because you guys must be doing something right. I think Waymo has picked you, for multiple cities now, and recent ones too. So, what is it that why is Waymo continuing to choose Moove as a partner?
Yeah. Well, I think ultimately, Waymo has chosen to partner with us because we accelerate the commercial scaling of Waymos into more cities
Hmm.
on a much faster timeline. And importantly, we help them reach that scale in a very economically sustainable way.
Yeah.
So, what does that mean? It means a few things. First of all, we develop all of the infrastructure that's required to bring a Waymo to a city. And there's really three different primary types of infrastructure that we develop. There's obviously charging locations where we service the vehicles and we prepare them for ride sharing services. Second, we also set up service facilities that's needed to perform maintenance and repair when needed. And then third, we identify the parking infrastructure required for situations when we have to defleet the vehicles due to
Mm.
bad weather, or other events. And so in any market, we may have multiple facilities for each of these three archetypes. And the real challenge in the art is in how do you orchestrate this very distributed footprint of facilities to make the overall fleet work as effectively and as efficiently as possible so that ETAs are as short as possible when consumers ask for a ride. So
Yeah.
all of that is on the infrastructure side. The second thing that we do is all of the operations needed to ready the vehicles for ride sharing. And the objective of those operations is just to ensure that all of the vehicles um, are as safe as possible for
Hmm.
passengers, while we also maximize the utilization of the entire fleet, which then, of course, goes to unit economics. So when you step back from all of this, the mental model that I have is we help Waymo to open up a new market, to light up a new market,
Hmm.
without having a single person from Waymo needing to step foot into
Yeah.
those markets themselves. And so we provide that acceleration for their go-to-market.
Yeah, that is a good point, because that is sort of the common refrain, right? To Waymo, okay, they have to own the vehicles, they have to do all this work, right? Like, how quickly can they scale? And you guys kind of take some of those, or most, if not all of those, on the ground logistics piece of the business. What's the hardest out of everything you just described? If you had to pick one, what's the hardest part?
The infrastructure is very challenging.
Mm.
We're looking at locations that need several megawatts of power,
Hmm.
and when you're developing infrastructure that requires several megawatts of power, it takes a lot of coordination work with the local utilities, the local
Yeah.
regulators to light up a site. Deliver. In some cases, we have to develop substations or deliver substations close to a site to open. And all of that takes quite a bit of coordination and very long lead times. And so today we're already in advanced planning for 2027, 2028, as we think about the rollout and deployment of this infrastructure.
Got it. And I guess from a sort of business perspective too, where do you think about opportunities? Like, I know there are a lot of charging companies out there. Where is that something where, okay, you're going to do it, or maybe you need a partner to kind of step in and help on some of the charging side, right? That's kind of how Waymo is thinking. Okay, we're going to focus on the AV piece. We look to great partners like Moove when it comes to on the ground operations. And where do you think about from your core competencies? What do you outsource or work with partners on?
Yeah, we regularly work with third-party developers for the infrastructure.
Hmm.
In certain situations, we insource that market by market, and it really depends on market access.
Yeah.
So certain markets are much easier to find locations. Some markets are much more challenging,
Hmm.
and so it is a very bespoke approach that we take for every
Yeah.
single market. But I think, to your point, prior to our partnership with Waymo, there were many different discrete vendors that Waymo partnered with in order
Mm,
to take their vehicles and go to market. And one of our value propositions was really combining and aggregating all of that
yeah.
into one end-to-end service that covers the entire gamut from infrastructure to operations.
Yeah. And I guess broadly, is the strategy on your side to have a few locations in the areas where Waymos or rideshare AVs are going to be busy and, have them well serviced? I mean, probably easier said than done. And then I guess too, maybe in a more industrial area. Like, I'm just curious broadly about where you think about positioning, and how many and, how you take into account some of these different factors.
Oh, 100%. The key to think through is how to minimize a lot of the dead miles
Hmm.
for the fleet in general. And so when you think about the three archetypes of infrastructure, for charging, which is something that's done multiple times a day,
Hmm.
ideally you want that as close to end demand as possible. So you minimize the dead miles as the vehicle goes back for charging. For things like service infrastructure, where it's custom built for service and maintenance, that can be a little bit further away
Mm.
because you're not every vehicle is not going back to that infrastructure
Yeah.
multiple times a day. And it's you can place that into industrial locations or locations where servicing just becomes much easier to manage. And so it is a portfolio approach to a city. And as we launch cities, we really think through very carefully about the heat map of demand and the right location to place the charging infrastructure, the parking,
Hmm.
and the service centers. And ultimately, you do want to approach this through really like a Lego block building process where you start
Yeah.
with one and then progressively build out as the vehicle fleet scales and as customer demand grows.
I like the delineation of charging being close for the reasons you mentioned and service being a little farther away. I don't think I've actually ever heard someone put it that way. And, I know from working with fleets myself that, I remember we had a Tesla fleet once, fleet owner, and we noticed that all of the drivers were actually had dozens a day of $1 $4 $3 charges at the superchargers because they were
That's
pretty abundant, and when they got nothing to do in between rides, it's not their car. I don't know if that's the best for the battery, but if you don't own the car, they were just plugging in and they might as well get a little juice. And I was, as a coach to many rideshare drivers, I was thinking, oh, that's pretty smart. And so I'm curious if are there any other learnings that you found like that? And that actually might be a good example because it's one where it's like it's what a human driver might do, but it may not be the best thing for that underlying asset, right? For the actual vehicle and the battery. So I guess, are there any interesting kind of learnings or stuff like that you've taken away from the Move business, renting vehicles to drivers around the world?
Yeah, and I think this really goes to the operational complexity of operating autonomous fleets in
Yeah.
different cities. You certainly want dedicated infrastructure that is 100% dedicated for autonomy because you want guaranteed access to charging in order to really manage the overall flow and the overall
Yeah.
utilization of the fleet. So unfortunately, today we don't use public charging for that. But what's been fascinating in terms of learnings is really how do you think about fine tuning the system for the impact of weather? Weather has
Mm,
been a very
mm,
interesting challenge in every single market. Phoenix, for example, is typically above 110 degrees during the summer,
yeah.
and sometimes it reaches 120 degrees.
Wow.
And in that type of a condition, we have to be very, very thoughtful around energy management
Hmm.
on the vehicles because the batteries drain much faster than normal. You also have these very
Is
interesting
that
weather
just when
events.
they're out driving around and in use? Or, I mean, passengers might run the AC more. You have to keep the vehicles cooler. Is it everything all above?
That's right. It's all of the above.
Hmm.
When you turn on that AC during the summer, it really starts impacting the battery life.
Yeah. Well, that's
In
why a lot
addition
of
to,
rideshare drivers like keeping their windows down when they've got an EV because they know that it
that's
affects the
right.
battery life. So unless the passenger says something, they keep the windows down for fresh air.
Exactly, exactly. And so I think hot weather markets tend to have more thought required on
Mm.
managing the fleet, for energy. You also, by the way, in markets like Phoenix, there are these weather events called haboobs,
Oh,
which
yeah.
are Yeah, these massive, massive dust storms.
Saw that.
You can see these online. They engulf the entire city. And when that happens, you have to ensure that all the sensors, the lidars, the cameras, the radars, they're clean, they're working properly to ensure the safety of the vehicle.
Hmm.
So very distinct challenges for markets like Phoenix. Miami, of course, has a very different set of challenges because the hurricanes and the rain that blanket that city. So we have to really think carefully about how to protect the fleet against flooding, for
Yeah.
example, which is particularly important for electric vehicles. And then, of course, London will present its own challenges, which we'll learn about, over time. Um,
Yeah. I mean, one thing, on the one hand, you've made a strong case for Waymo working with a top fleet operator like Moove, to sort of scale. On the other hand, you're also giving me a little pause because all of these different cities, I imagine, have their own challenges. And so you have to come up sometimes with a little bit custom, a little bit bespoke solution. First, we got to get you into Los Angeles because we don't have any of these issues. But other than that, I mean, what is the challenge there? Like, does that limit how quickly you can scale, or is it just sort of it is what it is?
well, I actually view it as an opportunity because
Hmm.
ultimately, as the Waymo driver experiences more miles
Yeah.
across more different types of weather and conditions, that just continues to improve the algorithms and the modeling as the
Hmm.
world's safest driver. And so, from our perspective, one of our goals is to help the Waymo driver see as many different diverse conditions as possible to improve the underlying product. But from an operations perspective, you're exactly right. The system itself works amazingly well, but there's all of these small fine tunings that we adjust in
Hmm.
every single market that optimizes the performance of the fleet. And that's what makes ultimately the fleet performance work the way that it does in the cities that
Yeah.
we operate.
You've also mentioned a couple terms. I think you said dead miles. You might have said ETA too, or maybe I thought of that in my head. That I know my audience is going to be familiar because we've been talking about this a lot, and it kind of made me think that of course, you're a partner to Waymo and other AV fleet operators, and you got to charge the vehicles, but also where you position like that. Kind of a lot of people are saying that how busy these Waymo vehicles are. That is going to be like the number one metric for success of the company, right? And like how they get to profitability. And so you almost seem like you're quite close partner hand in hand with some of these more like operational metrics than, just like a normal partner who's cleaning the cars, right? Like where
Yeah,
you put your depots is going to impact an
yes,
operator's utilization rates, which is what determines whether they make money or not.
yeah, absolutely. And I do see this as a very, very close partnership with
Hmm.
Waymo, where we help Waymo really understand the nuances of every market
Yeah.
and then plan accordingly. Many markets, as you know, have very distinct on the ground nuances, whether they're concert events, they're sporting
Hmm.
events. All of these large event venues also requires a very specific approach when you think about pickup and drop off
Yeah.
locations. And so I do think it is a very close partnership where we try and be the local arm, the
Hmm.
eyes and the ears for
Yeah.
Waymo, help them understand the local weather patterns, the local nuances around traffic, large events, and all of that makes the overall system just much more efficient.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Are there any new capabilities that you've had to develop or that you weren't expecting when it comes to autonomous vehicles, more operationally compared to, the typical fleets that you work with or that others might be familiar with?
Well, one of the big opportunities I see is how to really automate the fleet operations itself.
Hmm.
When you think about Waymos are the most advanced embodiment of robotics. They're effectively robots on wheels, doing very complicated tasks and decisions. But within the depot, there's questions around how do you automate the processes to ensure the highest safety and the highest quality possible. So, for example, when we uh, when we do inspections on the vehicles to make sure that the wheels are properly balanced, when we measure the tire depths or the tread depths for every vehicle
Hmm.
to ensure that there's enough tread on the vehicles for a safe experience. All of those activities today are critical components to ensure safety of the vehicles on the road and the ability to invent the right automation solutions or to partner with third parties to install and bring in robotic solutions in order to measure and to audit the overall safety and the quality of the vehicles while they're within the facilities. I think that's an important part of our roadmap on improving safety.
Gotcha. All right, Ming. I don't know if you're a reader of the newsletter, but our most popular story last week was a company out of YC called RoboDock that is automating charging. And I know there's another, we featured a story on Roxas recently. And I guess that's what you're talking about, like automating some of the functions in the depot, whether it's charging or what are the big ones that you might automate in the depot?
Yeah, right now we're really focused around safety and quality.
Got it.
And so when you think about safety and quality, safety being our absolute P0, the key for us are things that affect the safety of the vehicle itself.
Hmm.
When we rebalance the tires, ensuring that the tires are put on properly with the right torque, ensuring that when vehicles come back, the sensors are properly functioning,
Hmm.
that everything is working to the right specifications. So all of those inspections that we do every time the vehicle comes back,
Yeah.
that creates a lot of opportunities to really automate those inspection processes.
Hmm. I mean, typically, right, with, non-fleet owned vehicles, right, the responsibility is on the individual driver, or even with a lot of fleet owned vehicles, if you're renting it to them for a week or a month, or they never come back to the depot, I imagine some of this maintenance and safety, kind of gets swept under the rug. And so I obviously it is the right thing to do in a lot of cases, but sometimes I feel like, I don't know, do you agree that like certain shortcuts save you money? Because at the end of the day, right, if you're doing a bunch of extra work, does it cost you extra money? There has to be some ROI there, right?
Well, I think that the way that we look at it is not in terms of an ROI, but
Hmm.
as a base level of requirement in order to deliver a safe product.
Got it.
And so I think there are certain things that an individual owner of a vehicle, for example, sometimes I won't wash my car for a very long time.
Hmm.
And so the vehicle is a little bit less than clean when it goes out for my personal vehicle. But for a Waymo vehicle, we want to ensure that every single ride is as clean as possible to maximize to give really the best customer experience,
Hmm.
for riders. And so those are things that we really invest proactively into making sure vehicles are charged properly, cleaned properly, and
Yeah.
then most importantly on the safety side, ensuring that the sensor suite is working properly every time that it leaves our facilities, making sure that all the mechanicals of a vehicle are as safe and reliable as possible. So those to us are fundamental, sort of non-negotiable investments
Yeah.
that we make. And I think the ROI will then come later through customer satisfaction,
Yeah.
a better customer experience.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm curious, yeah, how you think about that as a fleet owner. Let's look at cleaning, for example,
Mm.
because I think that's one that's somewhat subjective, right? It has a certain cost to clean the vehicle. Obviously, if you clean it after every trip, every customer will be super happy, but that may not be financially feasible. So where do you draw the line? How do you think about that? Because I think this kind of ties into this theory that I have called the average rideshare customer. And right now, Waymo and other AV operators are getting all the early adopters, the people that are taking great care of the vehicles. But, I've been a driver for Uber and Lyft. And, when passengers are back there, they don't always take great care of the car. They've been
Mm.
drinking and there's no one there babysitting them. It might be even worse. So I'm curious what you think about, when it comes to things like cleaning and frequencies.
Well, I think fundamentally customers of Waymo deserve the absolute best experience possible.
Hmm.
And so one of the real value propositions of a Waymo, in addition to being driven by the world's safest driver, is having your privacy in a vehicle and experiencing just a very premium feel in your ride.
Yeah.
And so I think cleaning is table stakes for us.
Hmm.
It's not a matter of how frequent. It's we want to ensure as close as possible every single ride to be as clean to meet the customer expectations when they open their app, when they order a
Hmm.
ride, when they get into the vehicle.
But I mean, over time, right? Like in Los Angeles, right? You pick up passengers at the beach, sand gets into the car, right? Like, how do you think about handling that? Like, do those vehicles need to be cleaned at that point? Or, I mean, obviously, the more people that get into a car
Yeah.
a day, the dirtier it gets, right? I'm just curious how you think about like how that impacts some of the operations on your end.
Well, certainly, if there is, what oftentimes will happen is when there is some garbage in the vehicle, for example, the next rider will often flag that
Hmm.
in the Waymo One app.
Yeah.
And when a dirty car is flagged, then of course we route that back to our facilities in order to clean the vehicle. So when those situations occur, then we treat them, one by one. But again, I think the overall goal is less around the ROI, less
Hmm.
around the cost to perform the services. It's more about table stakes when we think about the product that we're delivering for consumers of Waymos. We want to make sure every single ride is as clean as possible.
Got it. Cool. Well, my last question for you, I'm curious, I feel like we're in the early innings here in the AV space, as we go through time, how do you think about fleet management? Do you think it becomes kind of the next moat in the autonomous vehicle space? Because there are a lot of AV operators, developed. There's three in China, right? There's others that are launching, in the Middle East right now. And I'm curious, how you think about the fleet operations piece, as more opportunity, more operators, come out there. How do you think about the moat that you guys are building?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we think about a lot is when you think about the sustainability of autonomy, we think a lot about the 5-year total cost to serve.
Hmm.
And this is really quite unique and very distinct from ride sharing, where you spend most of your time thinking about the unit economics on a per ride basis. Within autonomy, we look at it as the total cost to provide a autonomy solution over the life of the vehicle. So let's say over a 5-year life of a vehicle,
Hmm.
think about all of the costs that's related or required to provide that vehicle to riders, whether it's infrastructure costs, it's insurance, it's maintenance, it's charging, it's cleaning. And when you look at the 5-year TCS,
Hmm.
what you find is that in very rough buckets, the cost of the vehicle itself is generally somewhere between 30-40% of the total TCS. And that cost, of course, will decline over time as you get manufacturing volumes to increase and you get
Hmm.
scale economies for the vehicle itself. But what's very interesting to me is the majority of the cost. So the majority of the cost needed to commercialize autonomy is in the day-to-day operations of the fleet.
Mm.
And that's everything that we've discussed, whether it's infrastructure, having the right footprint in every city.
Yeah.
How do we think about charging costs? How do we think about cleaning costs? How do we think about the technicians required to maintain safety of the vehicles? And that's why we think that fleet operations are such a critical part of scaling autonomy
Yeah.
commercially.
Hmm.
Because unless you get this part of that pie correct, then the overall system isn't necessarily sustainable. So we do believe that fleet operations is a critical part of enabling autonomy, and that's where we're very focused around getting that right.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. And this is an exciting period because multiple companies are showing that the technology works. And now I think we're turning more to the question of, commercialization. How will they launch? Will they ever make money? Will some make money? And how to do that. So really appreciate you coming on, Ming. If folks want to learn more about Moove AV, is there a good website? I know you've posted some jobs in the past too on your LinkedIn. We can link to some of those.
Absolutely. Please visit Moove.io, and we're excited to be supporting and commercializing Waymo in as many cities coming forward as possible.
All right, great, Ming. Thanks.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Harry.